Well, despite corruption, uncertainty, political and economic instability, South Africa has actually become more valuable as a country, as a brand. Brand Finance, that values brands around the world, recently released its Nation Brands report, an annual study into the world's 100 most valuable nation brands. South Africa has inched up one place from 47 to 46. To discuss, we're joined by Jeremy Sampson, the Executive Director of Brand Finance. Great to have you with us in studio, Jeremy. So why are we all so bleak about South Africa when in fact we're improving as a nation brand?
Well, your lead-in showed that there's so much loss. You know, it's like a leaky bucket. Well, we've got a bucket without a bottom at the moment. We're pouring it in and it's coming out of the bottom.
Yeah.
The fact is we grew that much, but the other developing countries, which we've got to measure ourselves against, were going ahead at 3 times our speed. That's the average. It's up about 14%, whereas we're 5%. And so this is where we're actually going backwards. For the first time, Nigeria has overtaken us. Usually that's a flashing light to a lot of people, but they were 1 below us. We're in 46 now. They were 47. Now they've gone to 40. So we've got a lot of making up to do, and you know, for the president to start talking about investment, which we need to help growth, but investors want to make sure that corruption is under control and that the money that they pour into South Africa, and hopefully they will be used to good effect.
Okay, so we're only inching up because a lot of the top nations are actually moving down. We're kind of just hanging around where we are.
But that's just the developing.
Yeah.
The developed world
is overtaking us.
No, it's slowed down. You see, when you
the developing world is overtaking us. Yeah.
So you look at Europe and you look at what's going on in the States, and their economies are slowing. Some people argue that Germany's actually in recession. So we're growing at about that sort of rate. But it's the developing world, especially in Asia, that is growing. Even the developed world in Asia, like Japan has moved up into 3rd place, overtaking Britain.
All right, so we'll talk about, and I want to talk about Singapore continuously at the top. But for South Africa, are there any positives? So business confidence is down, skills are being lost. You've spoken about some of the problems. Are there any positives? Can we at least take heart that we're in the top 50 in the world?
I think we certainly can, that we're in the top 50, but also we can take heart from some of the things, some of the policies being put into place. If only we can get them activated. As we've heard, there's a lot of talking going on, talking about bringing people to account from the crimes of the last 10 years, getting the economy moving. And this is where the Minister of Finance, from his experience in business and what he's done at the central bank, he understands the levers that have got to be pulled. Yet there are still people trying to stop him pulling those levers. Get those levers pulled, the economy will take off. That means we'll have more revenues for SARS and less unemployed. And
we heard the president saying today that corruption has cost more than first thought, but people will be brought to book. I mean, how do we balance that? So 3.2 trillion rand is the country brand. 500 billion is corruption. A huge chunk of that we're saying was actually wasted on corruption.
Well, what scary figures. You know, when you actually look at how much SA Airways is costing, how much Eskom is costing, the money that's got to be put in to bring these organizations fit for purpose. You know, we say with any brand it has to stay relevant and it has to be fit for purpose. And at the moment, South Africa is crawling its way through treacle.
What does 3.2 trillion rand, that's our value as a brand, what does that mean? Because we don't buy and sell countries, we don't put a measure on the balance sheet for our brand. What are we valuing there?
Well, perhaps in fact the Guptas tried to buy South Africa. Let's face it, when you look at it that way. But this is a metric, obviously, of being able to measure countries against countries. And as you know, it's made up of the financial side and the brand strength side, which we're going to talk about later.
Okay, so the financial side is revenue coming in, so it would help if our economy was growing.
GDP and all those things. Yeah.
And brand strength, I mean, do you look at those common things, brand association? So the fear has always been South Africa was associated with hope, with Nelson Mandela. In recent years, more of the news coming out about crime and corruption. And of course you want people to recognize your country if they're thinking about tourism, etc.
Well, you're absolutely right. And this is where you want the good news. You know, for Kenya, just the wonderful marathon the other day has done, I think, good things for the Kenyan image, as it were. And South Africa needs good news, whether it comes from sport or politics, our ambassadors out there in business. All these things will help lift the brand South Africa.
All right, can we look at the top 10? So Singapore, I mean, what can we learn from these countries that continuously are at the top? We're looking at most valuable, that's still the US, but Singapore the strongest.
Brand strength, Singapore is at the top. And when you actually look, it's looking at human capital, it's looking at education, it's looking at transportation, it's looking after its people, it's making it a safe place, it's driven corruption out of sight. So every rand that they take into the equivalent of SARS is put to good effect, not the sort of figures we've been hearing, that for the last 10 years we've been pouring money down the drain.
So you want somewhere where people want to live and
feel
work.
safe and work and be happy and be looked after.
And incredibly, if we look at this list, the US at the top, but China up by 40%. So China's starting to gain on the United States. How, firstly?
Well, they took a decision in government about 15 years ago that to grow the economy, they needed brands that people around the world would want to buy. And that was a government decision. It's very interesting with these results coming out on Wednesday or Thursday last week. Vietnam has already made an announcement that in the next 10 years they want to double their brand value. And that's a government initiative, and it's been put in the hands of the Department of Trade. The Minister of Trade is going to be accountable in 10 years' time.
So it's a government thinking like a business, basically.
Exactly, and this is where you need capitalism and you need private sector with the public sector.
Yeah.
Now, after all, Vietnam was fighting a war against the States, 60 years ago, and look at now the economy just roaring ahead. And this is where we need to adapt and adjust to the needs today.
And China has Huawei that's sort of eating into Samsung and Apple even. In South Africa, we've seen huge success. So how important are those companies to a country, the company brands to a country brand?
Well, they're absolutely crucial. A few years ago, Nokia was the top mobile phone, and that was Finland's flag. Finland's ambassador to the rest of the world was Nokia. Now, at the moment, it looks increasingly as though China's flag to the world is going to be Huawei, which you mentioned, which is getting more and more dominant and is stronger and is leading a march on other companies. But it's interesting that where China hasn't got brands and they haven't developed their own brands, then they've bought brands. They now own Volvo, that well-known Swedish car company. Well, that is now owned ultimately by the Chinese. So this is where they're buying brand, developing brands, but they're investing in the future.
And is this a sign? I mean, America's still at the top, but possibly losing that innovation edge in the world?
Well, people are saying that 5G and what Huawei is doing could actually decimate Silicon Valley, which today sounds stupid, but perhaps not. And this is where we've got to think down the road. After all, Nokia was dominating things a decade ago. BlackBerry, do you remember BlackBerry? Well, they've virtually gone.
I had one.
And this is where you've got to stay, as I say, fit for purpose. You've got to stay relevant, because especially in a highly competitive area, you will be dead in a couple of years.
Final question, Turkey doing well. So that's one of our peers, often South Africa compared to a developing nation, Turkey in particular. But now they're bombing Syria, and I guess the politics can actually change things.
I think definitely. Look, this research for these tables was done a couple of months ago, but as you say, Turkey had turned around, but now with what's going on, it'll probably go back down again. And this is where things are very volatile. People say, oh, branding's boring. It's consistent. It's the same brands all the time. No, it isn't.
Well, this is fascinating, looking at countries as brands. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Francis.
Jeremy Sampson, the Executive Director of Brand Finance Africa. Now, we were hearing from